brief points of refutation, and then I'll weave the rest of my refutation throughout my speech, incorporating a little bit of personal experience. So a couple things. First, she said games are a business. Yeah, a lot of things are businesses. That's non-unique. Businesses actually bring us good things. Profit motive bring us good things. Mass production bring us good things. Even things that can be sentimentally given as gifts. I'm willing to bet a lot of money that the gloves from Mexico that were just given to Chris Paul, not to make light of this gift, I thought it was awesome, and thus my point, weren't made in Mexico. You check that for me?
They were actually made in Pakistan.
So markets, interdependencies, they build wealth, they deliver us good things that can be given as touching gifts to people close to us. Second, she talked about violence in video games, and yes, there is violence in video games, but you know, there's conflicting research about what violence in video games do to kids, right? There's some research that says actually working as a team and playing in multiplayer games leads to greater cohesion and actually people treating each other better. Yes, I'm willing to concede that kids under 10 maybe shouldn't play 4 hours of video games a day, and I would agree, as a famous comedian says, the kids are shitty, but don't tell me what to do with my shitty kid. If you want your shitty kid to stop playing video games, limit their time to an hour a day, right? So I don't think that's unique either. We can control, parents can control for how kids under 10 play video games. And moving on to sexism, and this is where one of my most serious concerns and pieces of reflection is when I have played video games in the past. But I think it's important to point out that Mara didn't touch Chris's point at all. That video games act as a reflection of society and tell us where we are at a specific moment in time. And society as a whole, the world as a whole, this is a generalization, there's a lot of sexism in the world, right? If you look at video games, the trends in video games are actually moving away from sexism. The trends are moving away from gendered roles. Yes, a large part of video games are still sexist, but less so than they ever have been before. And I think that's comforting. I think we should look to Chris's example to actually see the video games in our society, not just the stereotype ones or the stereotypical image of what a video game is, and notice the trend away from sexism. So I will acknowledge sexism, but I think that it's outweighed by that point, right? And my example therein is Mass Effect. In Mass Effect, you can be anything you want. Women are not dressed in I forget the name for those things. Probably enough. You can actually be gay, you can be bisexual, you can be asexual, you can choose your own journey, you can choose your own character, and that's a primary example of moving away from sexism. Another one is Portal and Portal 2, right? When you start playing Portal, and many of you have played this, you have this portal gun, it's a puzzle game, which I'll get to later, but you never know your identity. What this portal allows us to do is I can shoot a blue portal on this wall, an orange portal on this wall, and walk through this orange portal and out this blue one. And most of the time in the game, you never see who your character is, except for a few fleeting moments in the game where you're like falling from one portal to another in an infinite loop, and you can see that you're a woman, right? So there's the trend in video games conceptually is moving away from sexism. I think that's the point that Mara doesn't point out, and I think she should be comforted by that point. Addiction is my last point of refutation specifically. Yes, people get addicted to video games. I think this is a primary part of human nature, right? I think we can get addicted to porn, to gambling, to many other things. And I think there does have to be some serious consideration in terms of what it means to be addicted to video games and how we deal with that in society. But I think all of the positives that Chris brought you, and what I will conclude with, outweigh the negatives that Mara brought you, even if most of them don't exist. So, sum this up with kind of 3 questions for you to kind of leave you with something moving forward. First, what do video games mean to individuals? Second, what do video games tell us about our society? And third, what do they mean for society? What do they actually do? What is the feedback loop between society and video games do for us? And I will intertwine some refutation about Mara's last couple of points in this, right? So first, what do games mean for individuals? And Mara got up here and told you that it allows you to escape. It allows you to get away from things, to ignore your problems, to ignore society. But I think that's actually a good thing. We live in a modernized world, a highly interdependent world where governments and technology reach everywhere, into every aspect of your life. There is nowhere you can go on this planet pretty much, where you're not physically constrained, socially constrained, politically constrained, right? And video games allow you to get into a dimension, into a realm that is uniquely yours, to sit back for an hour or two and to create something that's uniquely yours and give you a moment to step back. And I think that's incredibly important. I think escapism isn't necessarily as bad as Mara says it is. I think it actually has some good implications for us, right? Also, there was a lot of talk about what it means to be authentic, what it means to be individual. And I think you can find out things about yourself in video games where you're forced to make choices. You can find out things about yourself in working with other people in video games. You can find out things about yourself and how you relate to the game as a whole. And I don't think finding out who you are is uniquely you sitting in the woods somewhere and reading a book or meditating, right? So she talks about the opportunity cost and how people spend all these hours playing video games. But I don't think all these people are going to all of a sudden get up and travel, all of a sudden get up and read the best novels in the world, all of a sudden get up and do these things that Mara talked about, right? So you have to judge video games then relative to everything else. You have to judge their role in the system itself. And I think video games are a good form of downtime and a good form of self-exploration. Finally, a new point matter for me is, what do video games mean to individuals? For kids, they mean curiosity, right? I played Age of Empires, Age of Mythology when I was little, and other video games which actually inspired me to learn things about history, to think about how I relate to the narratives in the game, brought me to my passions even more quickly than other means would have, right? I was able to actually find out what I was interested in, and so I think that essential curiosity that it brings about in kids is important. I need water. I care about this too much. Also, as Chris brought to you, it's a rich, entertaining experience, right? It allows you to experience, it provides a medium that's never been before seen in society, one that is uniquely interactive and also functions as art, and I think for that it must be commended. Mara did not touch that at all in any reputation or in any of her presentations, right? Also, it helps people to learn. Braid and Portal and these puzzle-solving games are really popular, and they trick people into learning without them even realizing, right? It teaches problem solving. And these games of like folding proteins and the like actually have real effects for society, and it teaches problem solving in a way that's interactive, and I think has positive implications for the future of education itself. When you can trick people into learning, when you can make learning more fun and interactive, you can make working with people better. So, my second question, what do video games tell us? And this, I think, is a really important point. It's a picture of society at a given time. So it allows us a unique window into a moment, but the moment in itself is captured in hours of gameplay and hours of interaction. Right? They can tell us things we are particularly uncomfortable with about society, but I think those things are important. And I think that even if those things are, some of those things are told us unintentionally, as in the irony of a Swedish company making Grand Theft Auto, Scotch, I'm sorry. But these things can tell us something about our society in retrospect, and we can reflect on them, and we can bring about change, right? And this might sound highfalutin and unrealistic, but you see, as I said earlier, the trend in video games is away from racism, is away from violence. These games are ever more popular. Problem-solving, teamwork are ever more popular. So I think that is comforting, right? So, and my last question, which is what I really want to talk about, is what do they mean for society? Mara said that in authenticity, you don't get authentic communities in WoW. I don't know if she's ever been part of a WoW guild who sends each other gifts at Christmas, who, upon one of the members' divorce, talks through that person and acts as their main support group in life as they're dealing with these times. I don't think she's ever been part of a Reddit community, which is not a video game, but actually contributes meaningfully in conversation and dialogue with each other that extends beyond the virtual realm to the physical. So for Mara to comment on no authenticity in something she's never been a part of is a little bit disingenuous. And I will grant her that at first glance, these things don't seem to build in networks of real friends and actual support systems. But what you find is that things are changing. The way we interact with people is changing. In decentralized relationships, where, for example, in a WoW guild, you're being judged based on who you create yourself to be in the game, your voice, like talking and interaction, may actually be helpful for kids in situations where they can't relate to anyone in their school and they can only relate to people online. It also helps us stay in touch with each other. When I moved away from my house, I worried about my relationship with my brother. But I was able to continue through video games to play with him, to interact with him, to do activities that required teamwork. It gave us a dimension and a realm in which we could continue to build our relationship. Something beyond calling on the phone. I think that's also a big thing in outweighs many other things Mara brought you. Furthermore, my best friends at home and I like to kill lots and 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 lots of zombies. Millions of zombies. and that experience, I regret none of those hours. There's no diminishing, there's not very many diminishing marginal returns associated with killing zombies. And it's preparing me for the inevitable apocalypse. I think it's also important. My final point is that besides addiction, the foremost critics of video games are people who never played them and people who are fundamentally disconnected from the culture and the experience, right? And it's fair to be afraid of things, to be afraid of change, to be afraid of how people relate to each other, to be afraid of how we escape, reflect, interact. That's fine, but it's not that scary. Things aren't that bad. We're moving in a good direction. Escapism, reflecting in video games, interacting in video games has good effects for our society, both in the real, as the case of the folding trophy, but also in how we interact. And I think video games are an excellent case study and something to be optimistic about in how humanity can interact with itself across distances, solve problems, look and reflect on our society, and move forward into the future, one that is not scary, one that is hopeful, and one that is generally better for everyone. And with that highfalutin sentence, I will let Ben come up here and bash me and be really honest.
So I'm recovering from a bit of a sickness, so my voice may crack at the speech, although given the content of tonight's discussion, I think that might give you more credibility. Michael and I are both seniors, and recently I've spent a lot of time questioning how I want to spend my time and how, as people moving into the world, we should spend our time. I've noticed that I've become increasingly busy, that each hour I have to spend time thinking, do I want to practice the guitar? Do I need to hang out with friends? Should I be shooting a short that I promised I'll make with somebody else? And then this is how I'm approaching this debate. I don't think I'll convince anybody to never play video games again. I don't think Chris Paul is going to convince everybody, or Mara, to pick up video games. But I want everybody to start thinking about and seriously, critically analyzing, is this time we're spending on video games worthwhile? Should we be doing other things? Should we be acknowledging that we could be living better lives than lives involved in video games? Now, Chris Paul gave you, I analyzed and gave you 4 main reasons why video games are good. 3 of them are nonsense. Chris, although I'm graduating, if you want to schedule an annual, like me pointing out logical problems in your arguments, you can do that. The first thing he did, and he didn't actually specify this, but the first thing he did, and he did it repeatedly, was talk about how much money video games make. How, this is $1 billion industry, and actually somehow command our respect. Michael and I both econ majors, and I think that's been driven home by education is that money does not necessarily indicate quality. If it did, Nickelback would be a serious music artist. I don't want to live that world. I hope you don't either. So just that rhetorical point that he made doesn't happen. The second point that he made is that video games make the world a better place. And I think he did this in a kind of spurious way. He referenced a couple games that really, in terms of like the total time amount people spend playing video games, it's such a small amount of time that I think would be considered statistically insignificant in terms of how we should view the broader video game culture. And he played in your heartstrings, talking about how a grandmother, learns, finally got to, experience science, and that's great and all. But if we're actually going to consider how we make the world a better place, we have to consider this seriously. Do we want, the millions of players that spent 120 hours playing Mass Effect 3? Or did all those hours make the world a better place? I don't think they did. And to somehow say that video games are making the world a better place because someone's giving somebody 100 grains of rice, I think is an experiment. The third thing he says is that video games tell us who we are in a broad social sense. And Chris, I think that I want to congratulate you because first, you've written an excellent book. But second of all, you're living in a time in which all of a sudden we can now do social and cultural analysis because now we have video games. as if social and cultural analysis did not exist before video games, as if we could not analyze the things in our lives and the cultural context that surround us for video games. So 3 of those main points I don't think actually tell us why we should seriously be valuing video games as a medium. I'm first going to go on to the points Michael made before going on to what I think is the final and clearly the most legitimate point that was made tonight evening on their side, which is that video games are really meant to. But before I do that, going on to Michael's points. He noted that video games can help us tell us who we are on a personal level. That somehow, through experiencing things in video games, we can somehow learn things about ourselves. I don't think this is really that true. Michael and I have had serious conversations about this, and the example that I can think of when